Hey everybody, welcome back to the next part in my Creating a Great Tone series for our Line 6 Helix. This time we're going to be doing something a little different, something I've had a lot of requests for recently, and I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover, and like I said, something a little bit out of the norm. So far, everything I've done video-wise has been using electric guitars. So I wanted to dive in and cover the topic of acoustic guitars, specifically when using Piezo pickups. I think that's been a long time problem for a lot of folks is getting a natural acoustic tone when playing live or especially recording. Personally, I would always shy away from using a Piezo pickup in the studio for recording purposes, but sometimes we have no choice live. And there's all sorts of solutions out there for trying to have our acoustic sound more acoustic-like, right? I'm a big fan of the sound of a mic'd up acoustic guitar, a really great sounding acoustic guitar with a great condenser mic in the studio. So that's what I always try to go after. But you know, even having said that, some people for live don't really like that sound. They like to have a little bit of Piezo tonality mixed in to help it cut through maybe a busy mix. You know, if playing with keyboards and electric guitars and having it, you know, be heard through a dense mix like that live, the Piezo pickup sometimes gives that little bit of cut that a lot of folks are looking for. The problem is sometimes it can sound almost kind of abrasive and unnatural, and I think that's where the problem lies a lot of times with it. So I wanted to cover, is there, you know, any way that we can use our Line 6 Helix to take that Piezo sound and maybe shape it into something that could be more useful for us in a live setting specifically, right? And possibly even for recording if that's the tone you're going after. So the guitar I'm using today is my Godin Multi-Ac. It's a really interesting acoustic guitar because it does have a really great feature to basically avoid the problem I just discussed, right? It has the, I believe it's the Fishman Aura imaging system in it. So it has like mic modeling built right into it. And you can have 4 selections here of different styles of mics. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. But it also has a normal Piezo pickup here under the bridge. And it gives a blend control right here, that you can go completely the mic modeling with no Piezo pickup, or completely just no mic modeling with all Piezo pickup. I hope I said that right. And then blend anywhere in between so you can get a combination of both. So this is a really wonderful instrument for live performance and even for recording. I've recorded with this instrument, always set on just the mic modeling, and it sounds just fabulous. You know, it's a really, really good model. But I'm going to, for the purpose of this video, keep this set just on the Piezo, so it'll be more like what a lot of folks are using if they have just a Piezo-equipped acoustic guitar. I can give you an example here quickly with a few strums of what it sounds like. This would be the mic modeling. Gives a very natural sound, and it works really nicely. Now, if I slide that back all the way, and now I have my volume all the way up on this, and I have the 3-band EQ that's on here just flat. I want to keep that flat for now because I just want to work with the Helix creating our tones and not messing with this. Now, if you obviously have an onboard EQ on your guitar as well, you could further use that in conjunction with what I'm going to show you on the Helix to even tweak things a little further. Now, here would be the sound of just the Piezo pickup in the Godin Multi-Ac ambience. Okay, so what we hear there is what we kind of have come to know about Piezo pickups. Maybe a little bit boomy, out of control on the bottom end. The high end might be almost an abrasive, almost buzzy quality to it, I guess, maybe for lack of a better term. So right now, what I've done, let's come over to HX Edit, and I've created a patch called Piezo. Okay, and with 2 snapshots, one just completely bypassed. So all the processing that I've put in the Helix has been completely bypassed, and then one that's just called Piezo with all the processing on, just so I could quickly go between the two and you can hear what the processing I'm doing is actually doing to the sound, okay? So again, here's just the Piezo. Okay. I mean, it's probably usable. I could probably dial in a little bit with the EQ here. So, in fact, if you hear that, if I go to the high-end EQ and kind of crank that up so I get a little more clarity, there's that annoying kind of piezo quality, right? If I come into the bottom end and maybe it's going to be a little boomy now if I do a little bit of both of those, that smiley face EQ. We get a little fullness and clarity, but now we've got that annoying buzziness on top. So what we're trying to do is clean up some of the maybe muddy nature of the piezo, get rid of some of that harshness in the high end. And there's a few tools I've used in the Helix that I think has got it closer. Now, let me make a disclaimer here. In no way do I ever think a piezo is going to sound as good as, in my personal opinion, a mic'd up guitar. But for live, oftentimes that causes feedback problems. We don't, like I mentioned before, it doesn't cut in the mix, so there's all sorts of issues. So it's a real balancing act. So I'm not claiming that this is turning it into, to compete with a beautifully mic'd up acoustic guitar in the studio, but just to kind of bring out some of the good qualities of the piezo while getting rid of some of the negative qualities, if that is. And I hope I can come up with something that's going to sound good. So what I did on my patch is I added in, let me just go over to the piezo snapshot. I used my split crossover technique. Now, first off, I'm going to start with at the end here of the chain. The LA Studio comp, much like I do with my electric guitar patches, I have it at the end just sort of in a mastering role, let's call it. Set fairly subtle, just to kind of control things, glue everything together. So I don't really need to talk too much about that. That's set 5 on the peak reduction, 5 on the gain, 100% on the mix, although you could change that to lower, 60, 70, 50% if you want more of a parallel compression, which I've discussed a lot before. I have a parametric EQ, which, if you notice, much like when dealing with distorted tones on electric guitar, we go in and we use a high cut. Now, a lot of people might say, whoa, look at the high cut. You have it set at 10 kilohertz. You're really cutting out maybe some of the sparkle of the acoustic guitar sound, where maybe we wouldn't want to normally put a high cut. But I'm doing that for a reason, and I'm going to compensate elsewhere with that. So I set my high cut at 10 kilohertz, my low cut at 100 hertz, just to control some of maybe that really low boominess. I made a couple other moves here too. I went into 460 hertz with a Q of 1.6, and I dropped that down 2.5 dB just to get rid of maybe some of that muddiness. And I went up to 8 kilohertz, and because of the dramatic high cut, I added in with a Q of 1.2 another 4 dB. Okay, so let's do this. Let's just turn all the elements that I have in here off. I'll keep the compressor on at the end. So here is just the piezo pickup set flat on the guitar, just running into the LA Studio comp at the end. Okay, it sounds like this. Not too much different than what we heard before. Let's hear what it sounds like when I bring this EQ in. It off. So you see here, it gets rid of a little bit of that boominess in the low end, but it also is lacking some sparkle on top, obviously because I've probably come in high cut so far down, right? So how do I compensate for that high cut then? Well, I'm going to go and use the split crossover technique that I've used on many of my electric guitar videos, okay? And what I did is I set the frequency crossover at 5 kilohertz because I want to come back in at everything above 5 kilohertz, and put like almost a shelf style EQ, which is what this will do, and boost that up to the desired amount to bring back some of that sparkle, okay? So if you notice on the low end, I don't really need to turn this on. I haven't done anything to the frequencies below 5 kilohertz. But up top, I'm going to add in 6 dB to all the frequencies above 5 kilohertz, right? So that's going to kind of bring some of my sparkle back in the high end from what's been rolled off with the high cut. So here it is with it off, and then I'll toggle it on, okay? So here it is with just the EQ with the high cut and the little changes I made there. Now when I bring that high shelf in, I think it sounds a little bit nicer now, right? It just has more brilliance to it, but we don't have that kind of annoying quality that we were hearing in that upper end if I just went into my 3-band EQ on the guitar and kind of turned the highs up, right? Where it just got really brittle and annoying. And we all know, we've watched bands play that have that tone, right? And they're strumming away on their acoustic guitar, and it's just, it's piercing to the ear, and it's not an enjoyable thing to listen to. So we still want some warmth, but we still want a little bit of that crispness in the high end. So I think we're starting to get there. One other thing I did, like I often do, and this is going to be total personal preference, I just threw a little room reverb on with a decay of 4.3, pre-delay of 11, and it's probably supposed to be 10 milliseconds, and a mix of 29%. And all that does is... just gives it a bit of a sound like we're playing in a room. You know, depending on the venue you're playing or what your ultimate goal is in the end, you can just toggle that on or off if it's not something you like. I always like to have a little bit of verb just to give it a little bit of life. Okay, now the one final thing that I did do, though, is I utilized the first in my chain was the 3-band compressor that's built into our Line 6 Helix as one of the effects we have at our disposal. Now, you might say, why am I all of a sudden using the 3-band comp? Well, the 3-band compressor is going to allow us to pinpoint particular frequencies and only compress those frequencies specifically in a particular manner, okay? So with the 3-band comp, what I did here is I set it very subtle. I set the ratio at 2:1, an attack of 10 milliseconds so as not to get rid of any of the nice pick attack maybe that we might want to kind of help us cut through the mix, right? A release of 100 milliseconds. My low crossover frequency was at 260 hertz. My high crossover frequency was at 10 kilohertz, okay? So I'm now going to go into that high frequency, and if you notice, I brought my threshold down minus 9.2 dB, and I didn't touch the gain on that, just so that this compressor is going to kick in just on those really upper frequencies if they become problematic, just so they kind of sit better in the mix maybe, right? And this is something you can play with yourself, depending on what your piezo pickup's like and what your guitar sounds like. It might have to be adjusted. The other thing I did to control some of the boominess in the low end after setting the low crossover frequency to 260 hertz is I went into the low threshold and I brought that down minus 10 dB. So it also is kicking in on the frequencies below 220 hertz. And I also added a touch of gain there. So once they're controlled and squashing down, I didn't want it to thin it out too much. So I added 1 dB of gain to just boost it back up. And so it's basically compressing the frequencies above 10 kilohertz and the frequencies below 220 hertz while leaving all that mid-range alone. So here's what it sounds like with that off. Here's what it sounds like with that on. Could even finger pick with it. You can hear even when I hit hard, you're getting a little bit of squash in the low end. The high end is nice. The mids kind of come through. Got a little bit of sparkle, but hopefully nothing too annoying, you know? Now, again, like I said, this isn't going to be, to me, a replacement for a beautifully mic'd up acoustic guitar in the studio, which is going to have a much nicer tone as far as I'm concerned. But I'm just trying to take that piezo pickup that has, you know, some negative qualities to it possibly, and instead of just like EQing it in a way where it's like, okay, it's bright, but it's like it's too bright and it's boomy and muddy at the same time, you know, it's a really tough thing sometimes. So I think this patch here obviously will have to be tweaked for each person's individual guitar and personal preference. I think it does give a good starting point, and I'm going to put this up on custom tone. under just Piezo will be what the patch is called. And the things to do for your particular guitar, if you're finding that it doesn't work just as is, would be to possibly adjust the high threshold, depending on how much you want those highs to be compressed, right? Also the low threshold, right? Depending, that'll be something you'll have to tune in by ear, but the low and high threshold are going to be where it's at for that. You could also change your crossover point. I chose 5 kilohertz. Some people might go a little bit higher. Some people might go a little bit lower, depending on their guitar. And you can also come in to the amount of that high shelf you want, right? So here was with 6 dB. I could go up higher with that. Let's say 10 dB. Go all the way to 12 dB. You'll notice it doesn't have as quite a brittle a sound as when I just went to the EQ on the guitar and turned the highs up, right? It's not as piercing and sharp. Now, I think 12 dB is probably too much. I think I ended up settling around 6 dB. Because it's what my ear told me worked, right? So, and then on this EQ here, you could also play around with your high cuts. Maybe you don't want to go as low as 10 kilohertz. Maybe 11 is going to be better. Just listening for that grainy, buzzy quality in your Piezo pickup to not come through too much. We're trying to get rid of that, and then we're trying to balance and compensate for it elsewhere, right? So I hope that was of help to some folks. I mean, there are other solutions to this. I know 3 Sigma, the company 3 Sigma, who makes IRs. I know they have some acoustic IRs that I've heard the sound files of them. They sound really good. I guess that would be very similar to using something like what's built into this guitar, you know, with the mic modeling, right? So, you know, those are going to be some third-party item. A lot of these videos, I'm trying to just make it so that we're using things that are on board in the Helix already so that we don't have to go third-party and spend more money. Although, that's a perfectly viable solution and might be possibly the best way to go. But again, if you still want some of that Piezo quality to help you cut in the mix, then this might be a preferable way to go. We're all going to have different goals, right? And we're all going to have different outcomes we're looking for. So there is no right or wrong answer here. And I'm just trying to throw out some ideas on that. So there are other ways to tackle this problem. But I hope that maybe points you in the right direction and gets you going and gives you a nice little template for some of your Piezo pickups. Now, one other thing I did want to mention really quick before I go is some folks also mentioned, you know, a lot of people who are going to be playing acoustic guitar, they want the Helix to be their all-in-one unit to maybe feed their microphone through too, right into a PA system. And they, you know, they're singer-songwriters maybe, coffee shop gig, right? Where they're just one vocalist, one guitar, and they want the solution all taken care of here. Well, what you can do is you can come and add, I'm just going to add a, let's see here, a LA Studio comp, but I'm going to drag that down to another path here, and I'm going to create a whole other path by dragging that split and then this merge down. So now we have something totally separate. We can come to the beginning here. We can choose XLR. I'm not going to do that right now because I have my mic plugged into here. I don't know what I'll end up with here. Some sort of a mess. Probably nothing. But anyways, we can choose mic as the input, right? And with the mic, then you could send that out to whatever output you wanted to send it to. Probably just out to your stereo outs if you're just feeding, mixing the guitar and vocal together. And you could also come in and possibly say, maybe you want a little bit of reverb on your vocal too, and you could do whatever style reverb. Maybe you want a little bit of room reverb on your mic. And your compressor, again, I would start off with fairly subtle compressor settings, but the LA Studio comp would be great for that, just to give you a little bit of control and not to be too squashed on your vocals. So there's an easy way of just setting up another path like I just did, and you're pretty much all set with the Piezo patch heading straight into, with your mic going into its own path, and then you can process it however you would like to, even with an EQ, right? Throw an EQ in that path. And maybe put some, low cut and high cut on your voice, or however you want to control some of the boominess or muddiness depending on the mic you have and whatnot. So I can't really get into that here because I'm set up to record in a different fashion. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that was of some help. I hope I didn't make anything worse for anybody. It wasn't my goal. But I think as a starting point, that'll be a great way to possibly get your Piezo pickup acoustic guitars sounding maybe a little bit better for live, and hopefully our audiences will appreciate that. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, as usual, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, share the videos if you don't mind. I really appreciate all the support and kind words, and I'll be back shortly with some more hopefully interesting content. All right, have a good one, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and ciao for now.